Welcome, data enthusiasts. I'm Joseph from Zuma, and this is our podcast, Data for Good. Here at Zuma, we're a dedicated recruitment company for senior data insights and analytics professionals, connecting you with Berlin's most influential and innovative companies. Speaking of innovative companies and people, today I'm joined by Rieke Osthues. She is head of product analytics at Zalando Lounge. And Zalando Lounge is the German online fashion club and lifestyle outlet based here in Berlin for both the German and international markets. Whew. How did I do, Rieke?
Wonderful.
Super. And how are you and baby today?
I'm good. And the baby's great. So we have a little one joining us today. I hope he will become a data enthusiast one day soon.
Super. He is very welcome. It's the first time for me, so excellent to be chatting with and working with three people on the podcast as opposed to only two of us. Super. So let's get into it. Rieke, you are an accomplished leader from the data world, and we all start somewhere in life. So I'd like to know, when and how did you first connect and discover the power of data?
So the power of data was when I started studying psychology, and I was totally unaware about this power of data. I was interested in people and human beings and how they evolve and interact. And then at some point, to be completely blunt with you, I was studying with a scholarship, and I needed a little bit more time than the scholarship lasted. So I was looking for a job, something to finance me. And then I stumbled across this job ad from Siemens, a German enterprise. And it was pretty mathematical and statistical. And then I was like, oh, interestingly, I'm able to do all of that. But I didn't study mathematics or physics or anything where you would naturally say, okay, this is fit. But then they had this little sentence saying, oh, and if by any chance you didn't study any of these fields, but still can do it, you can still apply. So I applied and they took me. I was surprised myself, and I really learned to love that. So I was earning my money in this field, and that's how I just entered. And then I was like, oh, it's pretty cool. You can do a lot of things. It's very powerful. I was in the strategic department, and based on the business cases and data and insights we produced, there were big decisions made. I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. I like it. I can do it very well. It's a lot of fun and impact. So I stayed.
That's fantastic. And that might also be a message to folks that don't come from a highly mathematical or statistics background, that you can connect with data and you can have a big impact on those around you. Great, lovely. That's a great start as well. And today, exciting topic around innovation. I understand that you'd like to talk about evolving product analytics, going from insight sharing to strategic thinking. Great.
Yes.
So, yeah, what do you mean by this to start with?
Yes, totally.
So
what I mean by this, and I think every analyst can connect, is you're confronted with a question from a stakeholder. So you're a supporting function, enabling others. So it's an enabling function. So you get a question and you answer it to your best knowledge with the best and cleanest data. You spend hours in cleaning that data. You search for a good method to analyze that data. You double checked it, and then you share your results. And then your stakeholder is saying, oh, thank you, that's very interesting. I just put it to the back of the drawer and still do my thing. So that's what I was confronted with when I started. Not every time, but every now and then I had this situation. So the question was how to get out of there and how to bring the value of data really to life. Because from the other perspective, from the enterprise, you have a data team, you have a data warehouse, you have data engineers. It's pretty costly to keep all this data and to save all this data. So it's a big investment. But the ultimate outcome is some insight or machine learning product, anything into that direction. But if I don't really use it, then it's just cost. Yes, so it's very costly for the organization to keep to save all this data, to maintain a data warehouse, to have a team of data engineers. Then you have data analysts, and they produce reports, dashboards, or you have some machine learning products, anything data related, and it's pretty costly. And from a business perspective, you want to have value out of that at some point in time, some return on investment. And I realized this huge gap here. And as an analyst, you're so deep into the topic, you're more like, okay, what method can I use? Can I use a different estimator? Can I write this code more efficiently? So you're more into the depth, not so much into the connection of the result afterwards. So that was a big learning for me, that I just got frustrated after some of these effortful works that simply wasn't used. And I was like, oh, why? So what's the reason here? And how can I have more impact with the work I do?
That's fantastic. There's a couple of points that we'll draw upon as we go through. To quote you, one of the points you made was about how users take that data and put it to the back of the drawer. So that's one point we can talk about, but also data is costly to the whole organization. So we need to be careful and strategic about how we use it. Fantastic. Okay, so if we look at your organization or industry in general, what do you think is the current state in terms of level of optimization? The current state of how data is prepared and how it's shared by product analysts.
Yeah, so I think that's a topic that not only touches product analysts more in general. So data is usually stored somehow. So there's some tracking placed. Someone is deciding we're tracking this and not that, because you simply cannot track everything. It's too much, especially in e-commerce. You have heaps of data. And then it's saved somehow. And then in some data warehouse, using some data pipelines. But what's lacking quite often is a proper data strategy where we say, okay, these are the typical questions we have to answer. To answer these questions, we need this kind of data. And then usually you're confronted with historic data pipeline. So this table is loading, then this table, this is feeding this table, then this is feeding this table, and then the data load takes 5 hours and then crashes at 8:30 and starts again. So then the data is not stored in a very efficient way. Of course, it will never be perfect. So analysts would love to have it perfect and have high quality, ready to use, readable tables. This will never be the case, but you need to balance it somehow. So I think that the data strategy where you connect the typical questions you have with the data you collect, how you prepare it, how you make it readable and shareable, that would help a lot. But that's often not the case. So the analysts are confronted with different tables, and it takes sometimes 2 days to just gather the data and join the data, because we still have the GDPR in place. So you usually don't have access to everything. So then you need to wait, you need to write a nice text. Oh, I need this data because I'm confronted with question X. And then someone else is deciding that this data is okay. And it's a lot of steps. It's a huge process. And then you join it. And then you start analyzing it. And then it's probably a one-off analysis and takes you a week. Or that's one product. And the other products are, of course, dashboards, monitoring dashboards, where you just feed some data in and hope that your stakeholder is reading it, A, using it, and B, understanding it correctly, and C, making the correct assumptions and insights from it.
Okay, so that's on the data gathering and the analyst's perspective. How about the current state of how users are using and working with the data? Can that be improved? And if so, can that be improved? Let's start with that first area.
I think from the current state, from an organization, the power of data is not completely released. So I think there's so much more to it. And if you look at the first, now the first AI products are releasing, so we can see power of data, but really useful products, let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
So the power of data is more than just I produce some dashboards and I hope someone's reading it and understanding it correctly. So it's the tech stack from the first. So you need a proper tech stack. You need to have a proper warehouse that's performant. You need to have analysts who are aware and using the correct methods. Because the problem is that if you throw something into a package or a computer, they're always calculating a result. But does the data you have really fit the method you're using? It doesn't tell you. And then third is, of course, you produce some dashboards, and that's usually the outcome, a dashboard or a report, one-off analysis or some monitoring data products. And then you can talk about which dashboarding system to use. So you can talk about the tech, but to really make it use and to really have a stakeholder use it, it's more a question of culture and organization. And that's more soft than to say, oh, we're using this program for dashboarding or we're using this data warehouse. It's about what's the data literacy of my stakeholder. They can only, it's a back and forth, and they need to meet in the middle at some point. Because if I have no idea what data can do, I will never ask questions unleashing the full potential of data. If I, as an analyst, have no idea what my stakeholder does, I don't really know the business surroundings or the business situation or perspective, I will never completely understand that question and just deliver that one number my stakeholder is asking me. So they need to meet at some point.
Yes. I hear quite often a complaint from analysts that they produce reports, they produce dashboards, and they keep an eye on the data and whether it's being used by the users, and often it isn't. It's at the back of the drawer, as you say. How much wastage do you think there is there, percentage-wise?
Plenty. I think it's plenty. So there are a lot of so these reporting dashboards, to produce them and to maintain them, it's a lot of work. It can eat up almost 80% of an analyst's time. If you really want to have one good dashboard that always has the up-to-date data, that's loading in time, that's performant, that's adjusting, that's trying to support your stakeholder read it, say every week, and tell them a story from the data, you need almost a full-time analyst, from my perspective. And my biggest learning here is that at some point, it's worth taking all these one-off questions from the stakeholder and gather them and say, okay, look, we can either do this and I can answer you 4 or 5 questions a month, or we can build a proper reporting dashboard asking or answering the questioning patterns you show over the past month. And then I maintain this, and it frees up time, the 20% for one-off deep dives, or I mean, they're included in the 80%, but it frees time for other things I could do, because it's a waste of time for analysts to search 3 days to get a proper data set to answer one question. So
interesting. Yeah. You mentioned culture earlier.
Yeah.
How can we use and optimize and even change culture?
If that would be easy, it would be changed much more often, I think. So it's a challenge. So whenever you're a recruiting agency, right? So whenever you apply somewhere as a data analyst, everyone's like, yeah, we are totally data driven. They always tell you that. And that's from one perspective, it's true. So they usually have heaps of data, but what to do with that and how to utilize that, that's always the question. So I think changing culture here is to really be aware of the value of data, and moreover, for the stakeholders who draw decisions upon that data, or are supposed to, that they have this option top of mind. So I'm working in product development. So it's product managers who are usually the decision makers. We are developing this product. We are going to release this product, or it's going to be optimized in this or the other way. So they're doing these decisions, and there are 2 ways to make decisions. And one is, of course, using your gut feeling. I'm a customer myself, and I know what customers want, and I'm saying this, it's 100% gut feeling. And you need this gut feeling. To me, it's not just black and white. It's only data driven or only gut feeling. It's usually a combination of both of it. But you can bring data to top of mind that, hey, next to my gut feeling, I can have a look at the dashboard. How is my website performing, or how is my app performing? Where am I losing those customers? What might be the reason? That's a huge opportunity. And I can say, oh, I always get lost in my app here, but what about you? You support this hypothesis that's generated by your gut feeling with some data, and then you validate it, or say, okay, it's maybe not true. But then you're usually left with some other insight. Okay, if it's not that, then I'm losing my customers at this point. So I think it's more marrying these two
Yeah,
phrases.
I'd suggest also it's marrying both the analyst and the user, because they'll both be looking at the data from different perspectives, and they'll be both could make suggestions about, oh, actually, how about we use this type of data instead, or as well as. What is there about fostering a culture of feedback and a close relationship that we can do differently?
So culture is about rituals and things you do together. So establishing rituals where you say, okay, we have this reporting dashboard, and we really make the user and the analyst look at the dashboard together. Because what I hear from stakeholders is a lot, oh, it's a nice dashboard, and okay, finally you use the colors I asked you for, but it still doesn't tell me what to do. And it's first is expectation management. An analysis will never tell you what to do. You can still release a product even though it has proven to be not profitable for marketing reasons or anything else, So there are good reasons to still launch it. If I say, okay, that's an area of investment. So data will never tell you go left, go right, but it will help you make that decision. So if you establish rituals where the analyst looks at the data prior, saying, okay, last week the performance was X, Y, and that. And then the analyst, and that's a big learning curve for analysts, is to make the next step to say, okay, the result is not X, it's not 3.5, the result says, what is 3.5? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it close to our target? Do we even have targets? Was it a step in the right direction or wrong direction? So this is the interpretation of the number that the analyst needs to do. And with that interpretation, that's the hook for the user who is not so data savvy, who is not so data literate, to say, okay, oh, we were moving into the wrong direction. So let's dig a little deeper. Because users are not interested in how complicated or great you build the data pipeline in the background of the dashboard or the method you used. They're not interested in that. They're interested in, okay, are we moving in the right direction or wrong direction? So you need to help them, bring them on their path. So these rituals help. Then trainings help a lot, but it's costly because you need to have the data users invest upskilling time in some programs, because not everyone is so data savvy. Not everyone loves data as much as we do. Some people are like, oh, it's cool. Back in the days, I hated math. I always hated it. So I don't like numbers. So can you have more colors or more bars or more pie charts? No, that won't help you make the decisions and bring value to the company and make decisions that are bring the product or the business faster into the right direction, because otherwise it's more trial and error and going back and going in circles. And that's where data really comes into play.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because it really is about the power of data, and having users perhaps not connecting with it, or not really understanding, and therefore not enjoying it, can be turned on its head if they can see the great outcomes from it. We're talking now about the relationship and the social dynamic between the analyst and the user. How about if we zoom out and look at the organization as a whole? What can the organization do to turn product analytics into a more strategic function?
So one thing that really turns the tide is to, when usually analysts are asked or confronted with questions, but I think every analyst can feel that once you dig into the data, you answer this very one questions, but usually you have heaps of side findings. You're like, oh, this is interesting as well, and this is interesting as well. And this is usually what keeps you going with the analysis and not going back in time. And then your lead is coming like, hey, why did you take so long? And you're like, oh, but I went off that path because that was interesting. So I digged a little deeper. So having all these insights, they're like saved in the product analyst's head as in a box. And they never get proactive. They're always receptive. So if they have time to really have the business knowledge either in themselves or with someone else, and it can also be a ritual or workshop or something where the analysts present, hey, these have been the pretty interesting or stunning insights last month. I just stumbled across. So what do we do with it? And present it to the decision makers, and they can formulate that's worth pursuing or not worth pursuing. That's fitting our strategy, our business strategy. That's not fitting into our business strategy. Oh, that's a helpful insight. That could be a business opportunity to dig deeper into. So these kind of things would really help to change things and to be more strategic, to be proactive instead of just reactive.
Is there anything you do as a leader? Would you recommend leaders and new leaders or team leaders doing anything differently to help their teams and their users of the teams get the most from their data?
Yeah, so again, it's the culture and organizational things. First is to really talk to the management to make sure that data is part of the decision-making process, that at some point in time, data must be consulted. That can be anything. That can be in product. It's usually an A/B test, but it can be earlier in the product decision, in the product development process. It can be at the very beginning. Hey, do we even have users of segment X, and how many are they? And are they worth, like a mini business case, a back of the envelope calculation? Would it make sense to attract more of them? Is there a segment behind that's worth going into? So these are the kinds of things you can do. So really make sure that there's a decision or a development process, and data is a part of that. And then second, of course, to enable users, to enable stakeholders to foster data literacy. There's no way around that, especially with the users of your results. They need to be able to understand data, and they need to know at least the basics of statistics. That what is an average? What are pros and cons of an average? What can I draw from that, and what can't I draw from that? It's not every one. It's worth looking at the range, especially if I'm looking for business opportunities. So these are the things I would totally recommend to do that and to foster that. So that you say, okay, there's a development plan, and we incentivize data users to take these trainings. We incentivize them somehow. And thirdly is to really make sure as a lead to advocate for your team, to have some good use cases where you can say, okay, this was a success story, and I'm sharing this success story, and I'm sharing that among other team leaders. So advocating and doing marketing for your team. And then fourth, what's really important is to protect the time of your team, to really think, is every single question, every one-off question really worth pursuing and investing a week's time of my analyst, or might it be better invested in having less data products and spending more time in advocating and explaining them? So usually you say a message needs to be repeated 3 times until it sticks. Usually we just send a report and hope for someone to read it and draw some conclusions. So what ritual, what way, what surrounding, what circumstance would enable my stakeholder to really use it to the fullest?
Interesting. And not have it in the back of the drawer.
Yeah, exactly.
So really prioritizing what data points we're drawing for them, which leads into you protecting the time of your team members, and then being able to generate the most from what they are actually doing. Advocating for your team, I love this, and also sharing success stories that can really serve to motivate team members, as well as encourage users to get more from their work with the data team. The other point about fostering data literacy, training users, what kind of training, or what would that look like? Say I'm a user, I'm a recruiter in an organization. I need data, but I don't understand how to work with it. How would you simply train somebody like me?
Yes. So usually what you need to be aware of that everyone who comes in has a different background. So maybe you've studied some science, then you have heard about that. You don't really love it, but you have the basics. For you, it's just reactivating them. And then you have users who have studied some arts. They are like, okay, last time I have been confronted with data was like 15 years ago, or 10 years ago, and I'm not interested. So you need to take off this respect sometimes that people have for data. They're like, oh, I don't like to interact with them. So you need to have really low levels of entry. So what we did is that we developed a training plan with 4 sessions where we started. The first session was just to get more comfortable with data. So we shared success stories, we had the people interact, we had them be more at ease using data and not being say like, oh, well, that's a dashboard with a lot of numbers. Let me walk away. So we encourage them to stay and to really read it and not just say, okay, that's overwhelming, so I just leave it. And then to motivate them, And then the second part was about some basics of statistics. So what are typical, how to read things, how to read bar charts, how to read all these charts, how to read numbers, and still with practical examples. And then the third session was some basic statistics. What is a mean? What's a median? What's the difference to a sum? And why do I need to look at the X and Y axis? Especially the Y axis, you better check twice. And so to really enable them, so that was the core session, to enable them to draw conclusions. And then we had an optional fourth session that was about testing, how testing works, statistical hypotheses, and really to help them formulate questions to the data. So what could the data point potentially tell me? What questions could I raise? Because the analysts usually don't have the business background to raise those questions. But if the business leader doesn't understand what data can do, they also won't raise the question. So the goal was to have them raise questions and then ask the analyst, hey, where in this dashboard do I get the answer? I think it's here. Is that correct? And if we get there, that's I think that's the goal of these trainings.
That's very helpful. So developing a training plan, and you've given us almost a step-by-step overview of what that plan looks like. Now, looking at the product analysts and perhaps their education, do you think would they benefit from sitting in different teams or different operational environments? I'm not trying to go down the embedded or centralized decision, but I'm wondering, just practically speaking, having the product analysts sit with different team members for a week or even a day and watch how they work, how beneficial could that be?
It's very beneficial. So as an analyst, I'm never acting isolated. As an analyst, I can work for any company, for any business, because a regression is always a regression. You just throw different data in there and you have numbers from 0 to 9. And these numbers just get meaning by the context I'm surrounded with. And if I don't understand that context, I will never, ever be able to deliver value with the analyses I produce. So it's crucial. And how I get to know this context, that's usually individual. So, I'm long enough in the business to have seen organizations going back and forth from embedded analysts to centralized, and then there are pros and cons, and there's not the solution. But at the end of the day, it's important that the analyst who is responsible for a certain team or stakeholder, that you have a steady relationship, that they get to know each other. That's really helpful. That they bond, and that somehow the analyst learns about the business circumstances the stakeholder or the user is in. And that can be shadowing, that can be sitting with them, that can be embedded, that can be different. I actually don't care. But somehow they need to learn that. We see that more often with AI products. For example, a recommendation algorithm or a pricing algorithm. If I don't really understand how pricing works, and if I don't really sit long enough with the pricing team to understand their mechanisms, I develop a very nice algorithm, but it's just not doing what's expected to do. So I think this example helps a lot. So you always need to get really deep into the domain to make recommendations to get most out of the data. Data without context is meaningless.
I'd entirely agree with you there. I wonder if the changing working styles that we see across Europe and globally around working in office and working to the extreme of 100% remote, how significant an impact do you think that has on that ability to understand your user stakeholders and even the commercial aspects?
It has huge impact. I think it's not just common with analysts, it's a challenge everyone in every job or domain faces. So it's harder to onboard people. Connecting with people, connecting with colleagues is harder. Like in the past, you would just lean over to your colleague and say, hey, what exactly is that? And now it's like, oh, do I write by chat? Do I don't? And then you just have the word to communicate. You're lacking all the rest of the body. So, I mean, pretty sure everyone is already sick of all these stories, but it's a challenge. It's definitely a challenge.
Yes. It's a common question in the HR field and a conundrum that companies have around promoting and advertising themselves as having these remote working options or hybrid working options. But often, as the case, the data professionals that we speak to, some are happy with the hybrid working and many want fully remote working. And I'm curious, even though they're working with data every day and not people every day, actually the work they're doing is for people, and there has to be a strong link and communication channel between the two. So yeah, equally as important. Okay. Thanks. You've shared so much with us today. Typically, we have a data advice question. I'm aware that you've given so much advice already to would-be leaders, data analysts, and organizations generally. But I do want to ask a question anyway.
Sure.
With product analysts, what could they do now in terms of actions and mindset to start living into this kind of being a data strategic expert rather than just sharing insights?
So what's crucial for data analysts is to join the triangle of product developers, product managers, engineers, and designers. So they usually build the triangle for building products, apps, and websites. And in order to have a strategic impact there, the force must be data somehow. They can be embedded, they can be just responsible, however you organize that, but they must be integrated as the force power to foster the product development from the other three. So, and that's a big shift in thinking, because historically data analysts have been at the receiving end. The product manager asking, hey, I need this number, give me that number in 2 hours. So that's a different way of thinking, from being completely receptive and more or less subordinates to being an equal sparring partner. That's this cultural shift, the organizational shift I was talking about. It's not about buying a different dashboarding system.
And also not being at the end of the chain, but rather being in the middle somewhere, so that they can have lines of communication with those designers, engineers, product managers. Okay, so what kind of...
Sorry, but one thing is really crucial, that they join the product development from beginning, from the first moment of the idea to the end, to the release and maintenance, because usually they come into play for, hey, can you do an A/B test for me? But they don't really understand the product. So the test design is usually not perfectly fitted to the product because they don't understand. And the product manager and the analyst both don't really invest the time to understand the product completely. So if you really make the analyst part of this squad, of this team, it's a huge benefit, because then the analysts have the context they need to deliver what they are asked for, and the other three functions learn about the benefit of data and having an analyst by their side.
Fantastic. So make them integral and make them there from the beginning, conception, product development. I guess that would be something that comes from leadership.
Yeah.
How about from the data or product analysts themselves? What can we do to achieve a different mindset so that they believe and they act as the strategic expert rather than simply sharing insights?
Well, first and foremost is to deliver, I use usually bulletproof insights, but we all know that using statistics is always a 90% chance. But what you should deliver is reliable insights that help and really bring forward your users. That's the start, that's the basics. And then you as an analyst can always discuss with your stakeholder where the benefits are. What are their pain points they're currently faced? What are the decisions that are being made in the future? And where are some gaps? And might data be able to fill these gaps to make this decision? And then you do that. Then you can talk to them. Just challenge your users, challenge your stakeholders. Like, look, I can deliver you that one number within a week, or I can make this bigger analysis that helps you make this big decision and not just deliver this one number. So start a dialogue, start to challenge your stakeholders. And usually, especially for product analysts, the technical skill set is usually just focused on A/B testing. The moment you become more strategic, you are confronted with different techniques, so you need to be able to do them. So EDA, exploratory data analysis, business case calculation, analyzing a whole website or a whole app on the flow. Where are we? How are different segments of customers interacting? Customer segmentation. So it enlarges your skill set a lot, which also makes the job more interesting. So more challenging, but also more interesting. So it's two sides: challenge your stakeholder and upskill yourself, or revive what you already know.
Love it. I'd written down very similar: upskilling, collaborate, and challenge with your stakeholder group. And we've also had a very good look at what leaders would do as well. That's super helpful. You've shared organizational, leadership, and individual contributor recommendations, as well as a look at how things could be at their best. Very insightful for me as well. So I really appreciate that, Rieke.
Happy to. Thanks
Super.
for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's been great. Yeah, really enjoyed it. And I would like to bug you again sometime, and I'll come up with some more product analytics questions or conundrums that we've come across, if you'd be willing.
Sure, happy to. Just let me know.
Super. Okay, I'll leave it there for now. Thanks very much for everybody listening and viewing. Any questions, feedback, please approach us or Rieke. And we'll handle them accordingly.